let's go ahead and get this one out of the way. Um, I want to be really, really careful about doing this. Um, I just want context. This is just like, think of it. Tim Travel is somebody else I like to listen to on YouTube. He does these history things, and that's what my goal is with this. Is kind of like a historical context. This is not. I'm not trying to get into any left and right stuff with that. There's just some laws that I think, mostly geared around the FCC, that I think are part of what made a political divide, and it's something I've been thinking about making, but I really try to be really careful about trying to do a preaching thing. Like, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to change anybody's political beliefs. It's just about context and information. As I mentioned before, not understanding laws has cost me a lot of money before, and so this is just information. This is not trying to sway you. Just it's something I think about, because I think if people do look at the laws and they do look at campaign finance, I do think a lot of our conversations would be much different than they are. So this was just I was mulling this over, and then I see what No Hippie had posted about political divide, and so I just thought, that's probably as good a time as any. So there's really only three specific laws that I really wanted to source. There are a lot of things that played a role. Examples like what happened with the appointment of Mark Fowler of the FCC in 1981, and the amount of deregulation that happened with the FCC at that time. Much like the banking kind of broke the door open, but same thing with the Patriot Act and some of the things that opened up. But there's two specific pieces of legislation, and then one court decision, and I just want to cite those as a historical context of how we got here, for how the news and the things are like they are. So again, this is an aside. All of them do it. It's bipartisan. It is not a partisan issue, and this is not a video about a side. This is just information. So the first one we'll talk about is the Media Consolidation Act of 1995. This is, like I said, things that happened in the 80s, 70s, here and there. There's always going to be changes, but the out of the big three, if you like your J. Cole, pre-Kendrick slaughtering that line. So the Media Consolidation Act is kind of the first of this big three. That was during the Clinton administration. Newt Gingrich was, and Congress and Senate. If you look at the voting record, this was not a highly contested decision. Everybody is in on this game. Media Consolidation Act, much like the 80s, much like the other predecessors, lifted a lot of restrictions. Whereas the 80s was really deregulation, doing things like commercialization for cartoons and things like that, deregulation. This was the corporate side. The Media Consolidation Act broke down protections where media companies could not grow too big. They still had an adherence for news and things like that to a point, but it was chipping away at it. But the Media Consolidation Act, just as a context, at the time, there were 50 companies when the Media Consolidation Act went on. There were 50 different companies that had network television or cable TV. There are now 4. And we could point to examples like what just happened with Paramount, and what's happening with WB right now, what happened with Disney and Fox. Those corporate grabs were a result a direct result, or direct descendant result of the Media Consolidation Act of 1995. So that's a really big one that kind of broke down the door for how we get to this discourse that we have. And then again, there were ones along the way. There are changes with the Patriot Act. The next the next big thing though was a court decision, and it might not seem like it was much of a media thing, but it was an everything thing. The Citizens United decision from the Supreme Court in January of 2010. That changed. That changed everything. That changed everything about politics, about corporations, about influence, and about transparency. If you're not familiar, I'm just kind of trying to more so mention these and hoping that people take the time to read these things, because that decision, specifically around the super PAC, 501c4 super PAC, not a 501c4 regular PAC, a super PAC. I would encourage, if you don't know what that is, to look that up. That will tell you quite a bit about this country. But the super PAC and the Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, allowed these media companies that could now purchase other companies to also give into campaign contributions. Really, you can argue that all of these things were happening backdoor anyways. This just legitimized it. This just made what was once illegal legal. That's the best way to think about it. Campaign contributions, hiding the campaign contributions. If you understand the FCCC and the 3-3 split, you'll be able to understand why Citizens United made it a way for people to launder money pretty much legally. And that was one of the hugest impacts. Another cliff note is the wonderful world of Ajit Pai and his control of the FCC after he was appointed by Obama. And again, this is all sides. This is everybody. It's not just one. What Ajit Pai did around telecommunications, internet, really broke the door down for specifically Facebook, Twitter. Whatever the stupid name is for it now. I didn't even use it when it was Twitter. So, but these social medias have a landscape like they do, specifically because of him. So he is much like Fowler in the 80s, just kind of knocked down the walls that were keeping some of these things secure. If you look at some of the decisions he made, and the biggest piece of legislation under his watch and also under Obama was the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, specifically the sections about propagation. What this did was break down final barriers that had been in place since the 1950s, since there was an FCC, and regarding television, it made it so that the government can legally propagate. They can do propaganda. This was the blowing the door completely off. If it was started in 95 with breaking it down, this was blowing the door off to not be able to put back on. This made it so that the news can lie the way that it does today. And that's the most relevant piece to where we're at today. But if you read the National Defense Authorization Act, I encourage you every year. It's always a wild ride. I used to talk in classes about 2011 and Section 1021, Section 1023, and infinite detention of U.S. citizens. It was so bad that that was the first time I seen like MTV really get involved in that. It got overturned. It got reinstated under Feinstein, and then was paired with HR 347, the Restricted Buildings Act in 2013. But we're getting off base there. That law is why you can see two politicians get up and talk on the news about the exact same issue and have completely different conversations and interpretations and meanings. Now, every law is up to interpretation. That's how it works when you go to the courts. But the broad, nothing in common, how that works now is a result of that law, and the steps that got to each one of these allowed for the other. Just like banking deregulation, just like corporate tax structure, these things all started and they take over decades. Kind of like cooking like a frog, you do it slowly so that people don't notice too much. But I would love for people to just start reading, reading laws and campaign finance. I'm I'm not on a crusade to save the world anymore. That's not what I'm doing. I just it's if you know somebody's gonna go walking in the woods and you know the woods, you might tell them, hey, avoid this spot, avoid this turn here. That's what this is. I'm just want people to be aware, and like I said, this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. And then Hippie had his little live, and I was like, man, all right, let me do this. So again, not trying to ruffle any feathers. Just it's information if you want it or not. So all right, peace.